Well, thank you very much, Graham. It's lovely to be with you all. Thank you so much for coming out this evening. Thank you to those who are on Zoom as well, tuning in. This is what we're going to look at this evening. It's the war with Iran, surprise, surprise. But we're going to look at it with Bible in hand and see that this is part of God's prophetic plan. Just one thing before I sort of get going with this and show you things. There was a word that Graham used in his prayer just there, and that was the word perspective. And here's the thing, we're all looking at the same Bible, aren't we? But all of us look at it through our eyes. I mean, I guarantee you, if you asked 1,000 Christadelphians to give a talk on events that are happening now, they would all be very different, but all still looking at the Bible. Would you think that would happen? Yeah. They wouldn't be identical things, would they? And therefore, I think it's really powerful that as a community, we all are in it together. You know, we're all studying ourselves. We're all trying to work things out. And fundamentally, what that means is that when you put all the perspectives together, hopefully it gives you the total picture. It's a bit like if there was an object in the middle of a field, some statue or whatever it is, and we all surrounded it, we've all got a different view. Some are higher up, some are lower down, some are seeing the back, some see the side, some see the front. And we'd all describe the same thing, but describe it slightly differently. So I guess this is my way of saying, this is my view of what I'm seeing. But that isn't disregarding that your view might be looking at it from a different view, and the two might well line up. And we should line up because we've got Bible in hand. But the other thing is, it's not infallible. I am fallible. We're all fallible. We're not infallible people. So there could be things in amongst this that I'm looking at it from the wrong way. Okay, but all I can say is I'm trying to look at it the right way. So those were the things I wanted to say to start with. The other bit is that this war that is underway with Iran is not in itself Armageddon, but I want to try and show you it's a massive stepping stone towards it. It's a hugely, hugely momentous and significant thing that's going on. We feel it in our bones that it is. The whole world feels so destabilized. I work in the mortgage industry and they're all talking about it at work. All of them. It's really on their minds at the moment, as it is probably with most industries. Another thing I want to say before we get going is this. When you look at prophecies in the Bible, quite a lot of people say to me, you're looking at a prophecy there and that was fulfilled 2,500, 3,000 years ago. And you know something? They're always right. Because I haven't really found a single prophecy that wasn't originally fulfilled in the days of the prophet that was living, or close to the days of the prophet. But almost every single one of them has got what I call a long-range fulfillment. In other words, yes, something was fulfilled in the days of the prophet, but actually the long-range fulfillment often concludes at the time of the end. And when you read the prophecies, you sort of think it doesn't really entirely fit with the original thing that happened, and it sounds as if it is something that is still to happen in the future. I don't know if that makes sense. So some might come up to me afterwards and say, well, I think that was fulfilled in whenever. And I'll probably say to you, yeah. But that doesn't take away the fulfillment now, because here's the thing. In Deuteronomy 18 verse 22, it says, when a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if the thing doesn't follow or come to pass, you know he's not a prophet. So this is why there was always short-term prophecies, because we ourselves can look back and say the original one was fulfilled. That gives us confidence that the latter day one will be fulfilled. If that hopefully makes some sense. So, with all of that in mind, what we're going to do, and you might want to open your Bibles at this passage, is we're going to have a look at Isaiah 21. And in Isaiah 21, it's talking about a burden of the desert of the sea. Now, you might think to yourself, this is sort of maybe potentially taken out of context. I mean, why on earth have we ended up in Isaiah 21? I mean, is this a bit of a random place? I'm going to try and prove to you that it isn't in a random place. It's in a sequence of things that are happening from Isaiah 13 up to this point that are all about the last days and leading up to something very, very, very dramatic. Just to prove this point to you, if I can, before we look at the verses on the screen, if you've got your Bibles open in Isaiah 21, have a little look at verse 9. It says in verse 9, and this is in connection with the start of the chapter that we haven't read yet, but it says in verse 9, "Behold, here comes a chariot of men with a couple of horsemen, and he answered and said, Babylon is fallen, and all the graven images of her gods is he broken unto the ground." Now, does anybody know? I may as well get you engaged. You're looking up now. You're thinking, oh my goodness, he's going to ask me a question. I can't believe this. Where do you think that phrase, Babylon is fallen, occurs elsewhere in the Bible? Because there's only other one book in the Bible where it does occur. And if you said Revelation, you are right. And that exact phrase occurs twice in the book of Revelation and nowhere else. Now, whatever you think about the Revelation, it's at the end. I know there's history, but ultimately there's a huge amount of it that is all about the time of the end. And so when we go to Revelation, so there's the phrase on the left from Isaiah 21 verse 9, Babylon is fallen. It occurs in Revelation 14 to do with the lead up to the kingdom of God, and it says Babylon is fallen. And in Revelation 18 verse 2, it says Babylon the Great is fallen. Now here's the thing. As far as I understand, the book of Revelation was designed in God's mind, given to his Son, Jesus Christ, who passed it on to his angel, who in turn passed it to John, who in turn wrote it down, who in turn has ended up on our laps. Which means, from the mind of God himself, when he put together the book of Revelation, word by word, I don't think it was a random thing, do you, that's written down. Every word counts. Do you think that God himself, when he's quoting from Isaiah chapter 21 verse 9, just did that as a coincidence? Or do you think God is deliberately saying to us, I'm going to quote this exact phrase in Revelation. The only other time it's mentioned in the Bible is Isaiah 21. Do you think he's trying to link us to Isaiah 21? He's got to be. It's categorically got to be. It's God put in a big flag saying there's a phrase, and I've picked the identical phrase from Isaiah chapter 21. If that doesn't link these things together. And what Babylon fallen is talking about is fundamentally the end of the kingdom of men. That's what it's about. It's the end of the rulership of mankind on this earth, and with the Lord Jesus Christ, who at this point, when there's economic collapse and chaos and merchants weeping and the nations collapsing, that God intervenes by sending Jesus to establish his kingdom, which surely must put Isaiah 21 in the same level of context. Just one thing I wanted to mention. This is a side subject, but I still wanted to show you this. When we read about Babylon in the Bible, it's really got all of its roots back in Babel, which is mentioned in Genesis, which chapter? 11. Good answer. So Genesis chapter 11 is all about Babel. And Babel is the same Hebrew word for Babylon. And they were in the same place, Babylon and Babel, the same area. It's the same concept. And when you read about Babel, right at the beginning in Genesis, which was the beginning of the kingdom of men, It says, and you look this up in Genesis 11, we haven't got time to look at it properly now, but in Genesis 11, it says Babel was a city and a tower. A city and a tower. Babel's two things. We think of just the tower, because that's the famous bit. But it was a city and a tower. The city was became symbolic of political and economic power of governments, basically. And the tower was all about false religion and idolatry. These are huge talks on their own, so you're going to just have to accept this if you wouldn't mind. But you know, in Revelation chapter 17, there's a woman riding a beast, and she's got on her head what word? That's interesting in connection with this. There's a particular word. Babylon. Right? And we know that this woman is symbolic of false religion. And it rightly is to do with the false religion, but it isn't just about false religion. Babylon isn't just about the false religion. It's not just about the tower. Babylon is about the governments that rule the world through politics and economics, which is why when you read in Revelation 18, you read about merchants weeping and wailing. It's not just about false religion collapsing. The economy of the world is going to collapse. So, when we read, if you look again in Isaiah chapter 21, Babylon is fallen, I believe this whole chapter is the lead up to the ending of all of the kingdoms of men and being replaced by the kingdom of what? God. Now here's the next sort of clue that we're on the right lines. If you just flick over one or two pages, you come to Isaiah chapter 24, which, by the way, is the conclusion of the sequence of burdens that start in Isaiah 13. They finish in Isaiah chapter 24. And in my Bible, I don't know what yours says, but I have little headings at the top of each chapter. And in my Bible, it says God's judgment on the whole earth, because that's what it is. And what I've tried to do here is just show you that Revelation 18 over there has got very similar language to Isaiah 24 on the left-hand side there. And I'm not going to go through all of these verses, but there's great links. Not least of which, if you read Revelation 18, you read about merchants weeping and wailing because they can't buy and they can't sell anymore. And what you read about in Isaiah 24 is the same concept. It says it doesn't matter if you're a buyer or a seller. It doesn't matter if you're a lender or a borrower. It doesn't matter if you take interest or you're giving interest out. It doesn't matter, it says. You're all going to end up leveled out. You're all going to end up with nothing. Doesn't matter. In other words, economic leveling out, economic collapse. That's what you read in Revelation 18. That's what you read in Isaiah 24. In fact, in Revelation 18:22, you see there where it talks about the voice of harpers and musicians shall be heard no more. If you have a look in chapter 24, verse 8, almost identical words. The mirth of the tabret ceaseth, the noise of them that rejoice endeth, the joy of the harp ceaseth. It's the same story. So we now come back to what we want to look at, because I needed to do this to prove to you that this chapter that we're about to look at, which might blow your socks off, is actually about the last days leading up to the fall of Babylon. If I haven't convinced you of that, hopefully with what I'm about to show you it will convince you that this is all about the last days. So, off we go. The burden of the desert of the sea. As whirlwinds in the south pass through, so it comes from the desert, from a terrible land. A grievous vision is declared unto me, unto Isaiah from God. The treacherous dealer dealeth treacherously, and the spoiler spoileth. Go up, O Elam, Besiege, O Media, all the sighing thereof I have made to cease. Therefore, says Isaiah, this is what Isaiah has just seen, and it then says, therefore, says Isaiah, my loins, that says lions, it should say loins, my loins are filled with pain, pangs have taken hold upon me, as the pangs of a woman that travaileth. I was bowed down at the hearing of it, I was dismayed at the seeing of it. So whatever Isaiah has just seen, it scared him witless. He's absolutely shocked. And there's more verses that we'll look at in just a minute in relation to what he says. But it talks about his heart panting, is so fearful about what he has seen. So what is this that's leading up to the fall of Babylon? What is all this talking about? Well, it's something to do with the burden of the desert of the sea. By the way, a burden, some of you might have in your Bibles, it might say the word oracle. But I think burden is actually a better translation to some extent, because in the Hebrew, this means a heavy, weighty, burdensome message from God. This has got all the overtones of judgment. If I'm giving you a heavy, weighty message, this isn't a nice message. This is something that's difficult to bear. And that's what this is. Now, the multi-million-dollar question is this heavy, judgmental message is to do with the desert of the sea? And you say to yourself, well, that doesn't really give me many clues, because the sea, it just says the sea, right? How do I know where this is, what this is talking about? Well, the answer is in the verse that we've just read, because it actually says in verse 2, a grievous vision is declared unto me, a treacherous dealer dealeth treacherously, and the spoiler spoileth. Go up, O Elam, and besiege, O Media. So I basically, and I did this 20 years ago, I was talking to some people just before we started this, and I've got talks on exactly this 20 years ago on YouTube that you can go and hear pretty much exactly what I'm saying right now. When you look up Elam, you can find where Elam is. And this is where Elam was. Because Elam, you can't go to British Airways and say, please, could I get a flight to Elam? Because they're going to say, well, I have no idea what you're talking about. Because Elam, there's no place on earth right now called Elam, but back in the days of Isaiah there was. And that is exactly where it was, which is in southwest Iran. Interesting. There's only one sea that Elam borders against. Bearing in mind it was the burden of the desert of the sea. And then it said, what did it say? Go up, O Elam, besiege, O Media. So Elam, look, is on the Persian Gulf. It's not the Atlantic. It's not the Indian Ocean. It's not the North Sea. It is the Persian Gulf, which is sort of interesting. Now, Media is another word for the Medes. And the Medes lived, I guess, a little bit more around where the word Iran is on the map there. It's all Iran. It's categorically all Iran. And here we've got the Persian Gulf. There's the Strait of Hormuz, and it goes into the Gulf of Oman. We're going to look at that in just a second. You might wonder why it says the burden of the desert of the sea. Because the sea is not desert. The sea is not made out of sand. The Hebrew phrase, the desert of the sea, can be translated the desert of the sea, but it can just as linguistically correctly be translated as the desert by the sea or the desert near the sea. So God's telling us about the desert that is by the sea, and he's given us where it is. It's Elam, which now locks us in to the Persian Gulf area. And you wonder to yourself, I wonder if along that coastline, I wonder what it looks like. Do you want to see what it looks like? I don't think many people go on holiday here. But here we get, well, definitely not now. That's what it looks like for hundreds of miles in both directions. It's sand, it's wilderness, it's desert by the sea. Bearing in mind, Isaiah wrote give or take 700 years before Christ. 2,700 years later, this could have been a metropolis of some kind, couldn't it? In fact, the other side is. Because what sort of places have you got the other side of the Persian Gulf? Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Qatar. Huge. You know that if you've been there? Of course you have. Right. Now, if I was showing you those pictures, it wouldn't look like the desert by the sea, would it? But on this side, it's the desert by the sea. Now, when you look at it, do you notice it said, "Go up, O Elam, besiege, O Media." Did you notice those words? So then you go and look up what these words mean, because we're told that one's going to go up and they're going to besiege. It seems like it's the same thing, because even though Elam and Media are two places, God's grouped them together. And the word "go up" means in the Hebrew to rise up and to advance militarily, to attack or to march up for war. That's what Strong's Concordance says. It's not just go up as in, I'm just wandering around somewhere. It's a military operation. That word "go up" is a military operation. The word "besiege," well, we know what the word "besiege" means. If I wanted to, in the old days, if there was a castle, you'd besiege by surrounding the castle so nobody could come in and nobody could go out. You would constrict the passage of anybody in and out, wouldn't you? That's basically what it is. And that's exactly what Strong says. It means to bind, to press, to confine or enclose. So now what we've got is a military operation that's taking place in the Persian Gulf along where Elam was, that's military, and it's to do with constricting and besieging that exact area. Which is sort of interesting when we see these sorts of things.
If Iran blocks the Strait of Hormuz, what impact will it have on the entire world, and which country will be affected the most? First, let's understand what the Strait of Hormuz actually is. It is a small area of just 33 kilometers, located between Iran, Oman, and the UAE. It is a narrow sea passage through which almost 20% of the world's oil supply flows, nearly 17 million barrels every day. This oil comes from 8 countries located in the Persian Gulf, including Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE for the United Arab Emirates. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Qatar, 90% of their oil exports pass through this narrow route to reach the rest of the world. If Iran blocks the Strait of Hormuz, following countries will suffer the most damage. First is India, because it imports 85% of its oil, and 60% of that comes from Middle Eastern countries like Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the UAE. Fuel prices in India would skyrocket, and as a result, everything related to oil and all industries would face severe disruption. Industries could shut down, there would be job losses, and the economy would be severely affected. The second most affected country would be China. China is the world's largest oil importer, bringing in 10 million barrels of oil every day. 40% of China's oil imports pass through this Strait of Hormuz. Although China has built oil pipelines with Russia and Central Asia, they don't even fulfill 20% of its energy needs. So, if the Strait of Hormuz is blocked, China's economy could suffer a massive blow, and if China's economy is shaken, its effects will be felt all over the world.
So that video was produced about 6 years ago, and I used it in some videos about 6 years ago. Here's another video that I used about 3 years ago in relation to this chapter, up on YouTube. You can go and watch it from a few years ago. Have a look at this.
All of this presence in the area from the United States is generally in place to ensure that the oil continues flowing, and to counter Iran's influence over on the other side of the strait. The United States and Iran have had no official diplomatic relations for more than 40 years now, since 1980, and relations between the two sides of the strait have been continuously tense. In the event of a war breaking out, Iran has made numerous threats over the years to close the Strait of Hormuz from their side over to Oman, which, if successful, would shatter the world economy. And that's enough of a threat to always make America, or any other foreign power, think twice.
You can imagine how exciting this is, having done talks about the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, bearing in mind, every night the Strait of Hormuz is now on our TV. So none of this is news to you. You all know all these facts. But 2 years ago, we didn't know all these facts, because it wasn't on the TV. And now it's all happening in front of our very eyes.
Iran also possesses a massive arsenal of thousands of maritime mines that they could theoretically quickly fill the 30-mile-wide strait with that would ground all trading activity through it to a halt for who knows how long. Theoretically, Iran could probably shut the strait down, but doing so would almost certainly invoke a very sharp response from a coalition of countries who would be staunchly opposed to it, likely led by the United States.
Okay, so this is all a few years ago. Documentaries. These aren't Christian videos, they're just documentaries on the significance of the blockage of the Strait of Hormuz. But this is a bit more up to date.
Iran has spent years developing weapons that could threaten the entire global economy. And now that the country's at war, it has started to use them. The conflict has all but frozen commercial shipping. And at the heart of the crisis is a narrow waterway that Iran is holding hostage. The Strait of Hormuz is the choke point leading into and out of the Persian Gulf, and it's bordered by Iran's coastline.
And as the world is seeing, they are exercising sheer desperation in the Straits of Hormuz.
Even though Iran doesn't have jurisdiction over the strait, it has long threatened to use force to shut it down. Before the war, Iran had stockpiled sea mines that it could lay across the strait, dispersed coastal defense cruise missiles that could be fired at ships from the shore, created a fleet of small boats known to swarm and threaten vessels, and deployed submarines to lurk in strategic waterways. Iran also built an arsenal of drones which it has used to attack civilian targets and ships. That's a key reason why the US has been so focused on sinking Iran's navy and destroying Iran's weapons.
And this means going after Iran's mine-laying capability and destroying their ability to attack commercial vessels.
But so far, Iran has still been able to mount attacks. And experts say that even just the possibility that Iran has laid mines in the strait is enough to scare ships from crossing it.
It's not only scared ships from crossing it, it's actually scared governments from sending warships to open it up, because essentially they're sitting ducks. I know Trump's saying he's destroyed, everything's destroyed. Everything's destroyed, beautifully. But it isn't destroyed. You know, Iran has still got, and they prove it every day, a fearsome amount of weaponry. And along the border there in the Persian Gulf, all these minuscule little attack boats, they're still there. And there's thousands of them, all armed. But they don't need huge cruise missiles. They can literally go up to a boat or a tanker and swarm it and cause all sorts of damage and destruction with something that's relatively cheap, a bit like a drone. Doesn't cost much money, $35,000. To shoot down a drone costs $20 million. 35,000 versus 20 million. And that's what's happening. To put it on a graph to show you what's actually happened, roughly speaking, 100 ships a day went through the Strait of Hormuz, up to the point of about a month ago when it's collapsed to, at some point it was 0, and now it's 5 or 6 a day that are going through. But to understand the significance of this, it's a bit like thinking about an artery in your own body. If you blocked up a major artery in your body, the whole body is suddenly suffering, isn't it? It doesn't matter that it's just one tiny bit of artery here or wherever it is that's blocked. The whole body is now shutting down. And the problem with the Strait of Hormuz is that it is like an artery, and it's a major artery. In fact, of all the economic arteries in the entire world, nothing compares to the Strait of Hormuz. There's no other choke point in the entire world that sees that much energy flowing through it, i.e. 20% of energy flowing through it. Nothing. There's not one even close to it. Hence it pushing the petrol price. We drove past BP garage in Eckington yesterday and it was 170. Did you see, Andrew? It was like 178. It's gone up 8p in like 2 days. And we're seeing that happen, aren't we? Why? Because of this. It's a major, major, major problem for the world. And the trouble is, how does this get now sorted out? Trump wants to get it sorted now, doesn't he? But how does he get it sorted? Because Iran says, well, we don't want to get it sorted yet. We're happy to keep going. You don't tell us when we're going to stop. And we're now showing you that we can shut down the world's energy, so now we're in control. And by the way, we're still in power. The IRGC is still in power. The only way that you actually remove a government, and this was said by many, many military commentators long before Trump decided to attack, the only way you remove a government is by sending in troops. You never, in the whole history of mankind, have removed a whole government just through air power alone. Even in Venezuela, what did they do? They sent in troops. No, we're not sending in troops. But maybe that is going to come down the line. Now, here's another interesting thing. You see there it talks about whirlwinds in the south. You see it says the burden of the desert of the sea, we now know it's the Persian Gulf, as whirlwinds in the south pass through. And I puzzled a lot about this 20 years ago, because do you know something? There are no whirlwinds normally anywhere near the Persian Gulf or the Gulf of Oman. However, you can do this, do your own research on this to prove, because this is almost unbelievable, right? Type into Google and say, show me all the cyclones. The cyclone, by the way, there are hurricanes over in the west and there's cyclones over on the east. So this is a hurricane in our language, a cyclone, the same thing. It's a whirlwind, isn't it? The very first recorded, they call it a storm there, but they think it might have been a cyclone. Records back in 1890 aren't that accurate, but let's assume it might have been. The only next one to 1890 happened in the year 2007. And then there was one in 2010, and then there's one in 2018, and then there was a cyclone in 2023, all around coming up to the Gulf of Oman area. Now you might say, why were there none and now there are some? I mean, how can this be? I mean, why aren't there just normally hurricanes or cyclones going on? And the answer to that is, I'm going to read this bit out. The Gulf of Oman is surrounded by the arid lands of the Arabian Peninsula. Dry air moves over the water, which chokes the cyclone by reducing the moisture necessary to fuel the storm's convection. So in other words, all this aridness dampens down cyclones forming. So they don't form. But something must have changed in the atmosphere or something to suddenly produce whirlwinds in the south. The first one, this cyclone Gonu, well, have a look at this.
By June 4th, 2007, Cyclone Gonu had exploded into a Category 5 supercyclone, the highest classification on the scale. Its winds screamed at 270 kilometers per hour. I grew vast and perfect, a chilling testament to its strength. Meteorologists watched in disbelief. This was not supposed to happen here. The Arabian Sea was not supposed to give birth to such a monster. But Gonu defied expectations, and it was heading straight for the Sultanate of Oman. Warnings were...
It's pretty amazing, isn't it? God says there's going to be whirlwinds in the south. We watch whirlwinds in the south, and now we've got all the besieging, because look, whirlwinds in the south, and then go up, O Elam, besiege, O Media. Because I've been watching these whirlwinds and cyclones and latched onto that for some time, I had to stop the TV and pause it and take a photograph of what appeared on the TV. Because this is what appeared on the TV screen. So on the top left up there, this was about 2 months ago in Iran, just before America launched its attack on Iran with Israel. And you see that huge poster wrapped around the building. This is a state government huge poster that they put up. And when I focused in on it, look what they said. If you sow the wind, you will reap the whirlwind. That's quite interesting, isn't it? In the light of this verse, as whirlwinds in the south, you're going to reap the whirlwind, and then we've seen these physical whirlwinds over the last few years or more. Now, the other thing it says there, it says that a grievous vision is declared unto me, the treacherous dealer dealeth treacherously. In fact, that little phrase is also mentioned in Isaiah 24 that we've already looked at about the judgment of the world, where it says the treacherous dealers have dealt treacherously, yea, the treacherous dealers have dealt very treacherously. There's a lot of talk about treacherous deals. And, well, again, quite a few years ago, when this was happening, I was wondering at the time, could this be part of the treacherous deal?
Because America negotiated from a position of strength and principle, we have stopped the spread of nuclear weapons in this region.
این ایستادگی مردم و مقاومت بود که طرف مقابل را به خوبی پای میز مذاکره آورد.
A win-win solution.
This is the good deal that we have sought.
So there was this deal that was done in the days of Obama. And this is Mohammed al-Baradei, who was actually the head of the IAEA, which it stands for the International Atomic Agency, Energy Agency, I think it is. And he was in power, as it were. He was the head of the IAEA, all about nuclear things, everything to do with atomic energy. And he was in charge at the point when the deals were being done with Iran. He was in charge for a long, long, long time. And he wrote a book quite recently called The Age of Deception, Nuclear Diplomacy in Treacherous Times, which is sort of quite interesting when you read here that the treacherous dealer dealeth treacherously, and that the head of the IAEA writes a book after all of these things and said it's treachery. The whole thing is treacherous. It's the age of deception, which then brings you to this.
Well, the threat from Iran goes far beyond its support of terrorism. The world is focused on the war against Hamas in Gaza, and Tehran is using the distraction as a cover to develop its nuclear weapons program. CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell has that story.
As Israel fights Hamas in the south and prepares for a potentially greater conflict with Hezbollah in the north, Iran remains a major player behind the chaos. That could be due to the regime trying to distract the world from what's happening with the country's nuclear program.
Whether it is a formal strategy or it's just happening that way, it's absolutely a danger. Iran threw out the nuclear inspectors, 8 most important ones, in September 2023. They tripled the speed of enriching uranium for most of the last few months, between 60% and 20% enriched uranium.
Experts believe the regime has enough uranium to make up to 8 nuclear weapons.
They could enrich to 90% weaponized uranium in like a week or two. Israel, the United States, the world is very distracted by Hamas, Hezbollah, and the rest of the world by Ukraine. So could Iran try to break out now? Yeah.
Iran claims it successfully launched 3 satellites earlier this year. Bob sees this as especially significant in terms of weapons delivery systems.
The technology they use for launching satellites can also be used potentially for nuclear weapons.
Israel has gone public many times saying Iran is getting closer and closer to breaking out and producing a nuclear weapon. And not that long ago, only several months ago, they banned any inspection of their sites, really trying to poke Donald Trump in the eye, who had pulled out of the deal anyway. So all of these things have been going on, and I think that's one of the reasons why, especially Israel, but also with Donald Trump, they've gone in to attack Iran, fearing that they were getting ever closer to breaking out and creating some sort of nuclear bomb. Now the other bit that's in this little phrase here is in verse 2. It says, the treacherous dealer dealeth treacherously, and the spoiler spoileth. Now I'm not 100% on what the spoiler spoileth is, apart from to say, if I was to say to you, tell me a nation that's interested in spoil, you would probably say to me, well, the one that comes to mind is Russia. Because in Ezekiel 38, we're told that Russia comes down to take a spoil. So I sort of wondered for some time whether the spoiler that spoileth might be a connection with Russia. In other words, Russia's interested in what's going on. But equally, I might be wrong on that, and it could be that it's actually more to do with America coming in, taking a spoil, because we also know that Donald Trump's extremely interested in gas and oil supplies, is he not? I mean, he didn't go into Venezuela just because he didn't like the government. What he's done is gone into Venezuela to take over their oil industry. And we know that because he said, we're now doing multi-billion deals with all these energy companies in Venezuela. Surprise, surprise. And who knows what he wants to get out of this particular conflict. And the other thing that crossed my mind was, Iran is friends with Russia. I'll show you that in just a second, right? So Iran's friends with Russia. If Trump does come in and grab some of their oil, what is to then stop Putin saying, well, your ally is Israel, you've come and hurt our friend Iran and taken some oil. We're going to do exactly the same thing over on your side and come and invade Israel and take some oil and spoil from them, gas and so on. I'm surmising, right? But you can see that something is going on. But Russia is definitely behind the scenes supporting what is going on with Iran.
Sources tell CNN that Russia is aiding Iran's war effort by providing intel on U.S. military targets. When President Trump was asked about this, here's how he reacted.
It sounds like the Russians are helping Iran target and attack Americans now.
That's an easy problem compared to what we're doing here. I mean, but can I be honest? It's just, I have a lot of respect for you. You've always been very nice to me. What a stupid question that is to be asking at this time. We're talking about something else.
CNN's Gabe Cohen is following all of this. And Gabe, tell us more about this reporting. Intel officials, I would assume, do not view this as a stupid issue. It is one that has a lot in the community concerned, especially given the fact, and we don't know that there's a direct parallel and connection, but we have just lost 6 U.S. service members in this war days ago.
Well, Bianna, one of the reasons that this is really significant is because it's the first indication that Moscow is getting involved in this conflict. Those sources telling CNN that Russia is providing this intel about the location of American troops.
There we go. So there's a lot, if you dig around, of Russia's involvement. We've already looked at this in verse 3. Look, it says, therefore. So, Isaiah, I don't know what Isaiah actually saw. I mean, maybe he actually saw the very things. Maybe it was a vision, like a TV thing happening in front of him, of the actual things. And this is him writing down. I don't know what he saw. But whatever he saw, it then says in verse 3, therefore are my loins filled with pain. Pangs have taken hold upon me as pangs of a woman that's in travail. So these are labour pains. And this feels like one almighty contraction. We've lurched from COVID. The day that COVID's announced that it's over, Russia decides to invade Ukraine. Ukraine war continues. Then we lurch straight into Hamas on October the 7th, 2003. That war continues. Now it's spread into Iran. These are contractions. This is just a big, big, big contraction. And it doesn't take you long, does it, to link woman in travail to the return of Jesus. This is a big travail. This is a big pain. This is a contraction happening. That language specifically is to do with the time of the end. Now here's another thing, look. Have a look in verse 4. Now we haven't read this bit yet. Verse 4, Isaiah says, my heart panted, and fearfulness affrighted me. The night of my pleasure turned into fear unto me. Pleasure turned to fear. And if you think almost overnight, that's exactly what we're seeing happening. I mean, we could be at the start of it. We don't know how long this will go on. But pleasure is turning into fear. And there's a lot of clips that are out there showing, 1 minute everything's peaceful, everything's fine. And next minute in these super cities, and the next minute there's drones coming in, there's explosions at an airport, and people are scurrying to try and get out of these super cities that man's built. And yeah, there's not been lots of people killed at the minute, but the fear, if, for instance, Dubai hadn't shot down over 1,000 drones and whatever, there would be a lot more destruction, right? But the other concern is that these interceptors that they're using, nobody knows how many they've got. And they cost an enormous amount of money, and there's a danger that they start running low and running out. But what I'm saying is, pleasure has most definitely turned to fear. We also read in amongst all of this about the watchman, and it says in verse 12 about the watchman is watching, he's looking at what's coming, is inquiring and looking at these things. And there's quite a lot that's said in this chapter about the watchman. We haven't got time to go through all the verses, but when you read it, what it's saying is the watchman is on the edge of the tower, he's looking at approaching forces, he's reporting day and night, and he announces ultimately the fall of Babylon. You see, this is where this is headed. I said at the beginning, it's going to lead up to the fall of Babylon, the end of the kingdom of men. Now, if you've got a couple of minutes, let me just show you another few amazing things, because it isn't just these few verses in Isaiah 21. Because if you have a look in Isaiah 21 verse 13, we now move into the burden of Arabia. Anybody want to tell me where Arabia is? Saudi Arabia. Arabia is Saudi Arabia. And from verse 13 to 15, it says, the burden upon Arabia, they fled from the swords, from the drawn sword, and from the bent bow, and from the grievousness of war. That's what's happening right now with Saudi Arabia, but it could get worse, couldn't it? It most definitely could get worse. There's talk today of Saudi Arabia and some of the other Gulf Arab nations saying enough's enough, we're going to get involved in this war. But ultimately, this tells me that they end up fleeing from it. In other words, they're on the back foot. They are on the back foot with this. And you see it talks about the bent bow. Iran is not firing arrows, but they are like bows and arrows. In modern bows and arrows, they are missiles. And they're fleeing from the grievousness of war. It's exactly the sorts of things that we're starting to see.
What began as a war between Iran and the powerful duo of the United States and Israel is now spiraling across the region. Missiles are flying, drones are striking, and American bases are being targeted without pause. But in the middle of this expanding conflict stand the Arab nations, not as spectators, but as targets. Despite sharing brotherly ties, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Bahrain, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Oman, Jordan, and Iraq have all witnessed its fury. But after being struck by Iran, why are Arab countries not retaliating?
So, we'll skip this slide because of time. The next chapter, I don't know what your Bible says, but what does, in my Bible, in Isaiah 22, has got a heading. And it just simply says Jerusalem. That's just what it says Jerusalem. And you might say, well, why does it say that? Because verse 1 of Isaiah 22 says the burden of the valley of vision. I mean, where's the valley of vision? It doesn't say. bit like the burden of the desert of the sea, it doesn't say. But you keep reading in Isaiah 22, and guess what? It's all about Jerusalem. Verse 4, the spoiling of the daughter of my people. So this is God's people, this is the Jews. It's a day of trouble and treading down. Verse 9 says, there's a breach of the city of David. Verse 10 says, you have numbered the houses of Jerusalem, and the houses have you broken down to fortify the wall. When you read this chapter 22, it mirrors exactly, I believe, Zechariah 14. It is a great cataclysmic destruction that is coming upon Jerusalem in chapter 22. In other words, what we're seeing in chapter 21 playing out now leads ultimately to chapter 22, which is Armageddon. You remember I said that right now is not Armageddon, but this is a huge stepping stone to it, and chapter 22 is fast approaching. It also says in Isaiah 22 verse 6 that Elam bears the quiver with chariots of men and horsemen, and Ker uncovered the shield. So in this final conflict over Jerusalem, Iran is still operational as a country, still able to fire missiles even at this point in the future. In fact, when you look all the way through Isaiah, you read a lot about Iran and its missiles. This is another one. Behold, I will stir up the Medes against them. They don't care about silver. They don't care about gold. Their bows will slaughter the young men. They have no mercy on the fruit of the womb. Their eyes don't pity children. This is an amazing description of the rulership of Tehran. They don't care. They might have slaughtered 35 to 40,000 of their own people on the streets who were protesting. You imagine that any government in the world killing 40,000 of their own people. I mean, it's utterly shocking, but they don't care. Man, woman or child. They don't care about an economic deal. They don't care about silver and gold. They're ideologically driven. Last 2 minutes. So this is sort of where we are, but here's some principles that I think we can also look at. First of all is this. The Iranian regime, in some and I wrote this again about 6 months ago, before all of this had kicked off, that whatever happens with Iran and an initial conflict over the Strait of Hormuz, the regime will survive to some extent. The reason we know it is because Ezekiel 38, which is about Armageddon and the invasion of Israel, clearly says in verse 5 that Persia, who by the way is first on the list of allies to Russia, is with Russia, because Persia's Iran. So therefore, Trump is not going to destroy the regime in Iran. Or even if he did, there'd be another regime that comes into power that's still friendly with Russia and still one day attacks Israel in the future. So it's as good as the same regime. The other thing we can expect is from Ezekiel 38 is that Russia will continue to back and support Iran, because it says in Ezekiel 38 that Russia acts as a protector, a guard to those that are with it, and one of them, first on the list, is Iran. So here's the image. So there is the Ayatollah, and there's Netanyahu, and there's Trump. And now the image looks like this. It doesn't really look any different. Just a bit younger. We know we haven't seen him for a while, but they don't know who to talk to anymore. It's like the regime's still there. The IRGC is still there. The weapons are still there. The missiles are still there. The blocking of the Strait of Hormuz is still there. I mean, what do we do? The other thing that we can say is that in Ezekiel 38, Sheba and Edom, which are the Gulf Arab states that are being hit by Iran right now, and the merchants of Tarshish and the young lions, that's all to do with Britain and America. And by the way, what's Britain just said we're going to do? Send ships into the Persian Gulf to try and open it up. America says we're going to have to try and open it up because nobody else will come and join us. Maybe we find some others. But there's the alliance that we see there right now is also still there in Ezekiel 38. But there's one big difference. At the minute, America, doesn't Trump keep saying we've got the biggest army, the biggest, most powerful? In all history, there's never been a bigger and better and more beautiful army than we've got. Nothing's bigger, nothing's more beautiful, and nothing's better. Nobody can defeat us. But something has changed here because America can't stop Russia. America can't stop Russia. Russia comes down. I mean, Ukraine at the minute is stopping Russia, for goodness sake. Here, America and all the Gulf Arabs can't stop Russia. They say, what are you doing? And it could be, that if this conflict in the Gulf carries on, in the Persian Gulf, that maybe we might see, I know as shocking as this picture is, I don't know if it will look like that, but something is going to weaken the power of America at some point. Even the amount of missiles that have been expended over this current conflict has cost America, Trump is going back to Congress, for $200 billion to support the amount of money that is spent blowing things up. They're running low on certain missiles. They gave loads to Ukraine, and now the stockpiles are running right down. And you might think Iran could never do that to a warship. I don't know if any of you remember, in the year 2000, 2 men in a rubber dinghy paddled up to the USS Cole that was moored up in Oman and very almost sunk a prime warship of America. They killed 37 servicemen on board, blew a hole in the side of it, the size you couldn't... How it never sunk, nobody really quite knows. But a dinghy with explosives in almost sunk a warship. Something could happen in the Gulf with their ships trying to get through, with Iran still saying we're not going to allow you to do it. Something's going to weaken the West. The final thing is to say that while all this is going on, we haven't really mentioned Israel, but while all this is going on, Israel is fighting for its life by removing nearby enemies, aren't they? They're about to go into Lebanon, imminently about to go into Lebanon, all the way up to the Litani River. Miles and miles into Lebanon. Why? To get rid of the pricking briars. And what Israel is doing is removing Hamas, removing Hezbollah, removing its nearby enemies, exactly like the Inner Ring War we've been talking about for years. That's what they're doing. And somehow or other, there's going to be a declaration of some sort of peace that is declared between Israel, and where they say, we've now removed the enemies, we're okay. And how that comes about, we need to wait and see. But there is going to be a false peace that comes along. Here's the order. Last slide. Isaiah 21, we're in it right now. Surely we're in it right now. The burden of the desert of the sea. That, at the same time, we've got regional wars around Israel as they remove the pricking briars, as we're seeing happen. There's going to be a declaration of false peace at some point. Might include Ukraine. It might include Iran. It might include Israel. Something's going to happen to bring some of this to an end. And there's going to be a declaration of false peace. And into that false peace comes Gog. But when does Jesus come back in amongst all of this? Somewhere before the Gogian invasion. Somewhere between where we are right now and number 3 is when Jesus, I truly believe, comes back. And he comes back because Babylon is fallen. The kingdoms of the men are blowing themselves apart. And he will return to put all of this right. And so this war with Iran is part of the plan. It's detailed for us quite possibly here in the verses that we've looked at. It's the massive stepping stone to see Jesus come, the kingdoms of men to end, and for the kingdom of God to be established. Thank you for listening.